Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. I am your host, Chad Kroger, and I'll have the quesadilla, please. Haha. All right, guys, we have a guest tonight, and we're going to get to him in just a minute, but there's a quick story I want to bring up. I try to be very positive on the series, on the show, but every once in a while something comes up and it just irks me, and had something come up just before the show, and I have to point it out. Now, some of you know that I used to work for one of the comics news sites, did it for 5 years. I probably still considered that doing with what I do now. I never considered myself a journalist, but I wrote a lot of stories in that time. I think I wrote like over 15,000 stories in 5 years is what it ended up being. And headlines are very important. Now, there's a headline running on one of the bigger sites right now, and it literally says, Marvel is bringing back Luke Cage and teaming him with Daredevil. And they're showing the picture for that. It's like I'm looking at it right now on Facebook, and that's what I see. And the picture is the Luke Cage logo from Netflix. Okay? So you see Marvel's bringing back Luke Cage, teaming him with Daredevil, the Netflix logo. You're likely going to click on that thinking, oh, they're bringing back Mike Coulter and Charlie Cox. We're going to get a new series on Disney Plus with these characters. And that's what you're thinking, clicking that link. And they want you to think that because they want you to click that link. The problem is it has nothing to do with Marvel Studios, with the Netflix series, with any of those things. It's Marvel Comics is bringing back a 3-issue Luke Cage series where Daredevil, and at this point it's Elektra as Daredevil, will be appearing. So anybody clicking on that link and they're thinking it's going to be the return of the Netflix series is going to be automatically disappointed in the news they read, no matter what that news is, because they're setting that news story up for failure. They're going to get the clicks, but they're not going to get they're not bringing it across as proper news. It's just a BS headline, and that bothers me a lot. One of my friends is one of the artists on there, Ray Anthony Height. He's issue 2 artist. There's some great people working on that book. Luke Cage is a popular character. Daredevil is doing really well with Elektra. All of that stuff, it could have been a very positive story. They could have put the image that Marvel gave them. They could have said Marvel Comics is bringing back Luke Cage and set the expectation right for anybody clicking on that link. But instead, they did a bait and switch. They just used the word Marvel instead of Marvel Comics. And they put the Netflix logo so that you're thinking you're clicking about the TV series. And to me, that's a bunch of BS. So I call them out on that. That is just wrong. It's bad journalism and shouldn't be done. So, all right, that's off my chest. And now we're going to bring in our guest. Sorry, Tom. All right, he is the creator of the Black Alpha comic series, which is currently having a Kickstarter for the 2nd issue. He's also worked for Marvel, doing books like Punisher 2099. He's worked in film and a bunch of other stuff. Please welcome Tom Raish.
Hey, Dan, or should I say Chad? I'm a big fan of your work. I love the back. Big fan of Nickelback. So,
yeah, that's my silly thing I do is I always come up with another person name because the show's called the Dan Wickline Show. So I don't want to say, hey, welcome to and I'm your host, So I always come up with a joke name.
I also want to give a shout out, since you and I are both on screen at the same time, to all bearded, long-haired dudes out there. So,
oh yeah. Yeah, they're a major part of the comic industry, the bearded, long-haired people.
Oh, for sure, yes.
Yeah. Jay said he's been duped many times from that. Completely agree. Okay, well, thank you, Jay. Yeah, I sorry about doing a rant right before I brought you on, but that article kind of annoyed me right before I got here. So
Well, understandable. There's a news site that I will not name out of professionalism that is kind of known for being a clickbaity site. And a lot of times I'll see that show up through my Facebook feed. And you can tell it's like a lot of it is probably 95% nonsense, but people will see that. And maybe even before clicking on the article, they'll have like an emotional response or excitement or whatever the case is. And then, and then people end up having a debate. And yeah, it just kind of gets them sucked into like a bunch of baloney. And I find that very questionable. So.
Yeah. JD points out that he's also a bearded, long-haired dude running the boards today.
Awesome.
So, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump in first on your new Kickstarter.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. You've got Black Alpha, which from what I understand is a book that you've wanted to do since you were like 11 years old.
Yeah, I mean, the story that I've repeated on a number of occasions was my first memories of television were Batman, Spider-Man, and Star Trek when I was about 4, 5. Immediately sucked in. It was kind of like love at first sight, no turning back after that. And then my mother, Maggie, who's a wonderful artist in her own right, and my dad, by the way, was stationed in Guam when this was going on. So I spent a lot of time in front of the TV, but I remember I had seen some drawing my mother had done, and then seeing those really inspired me at that young age to pick up a pencil and start doodling. And then once we came back to the States, so it's interesting because I was exposed to comic characters and things like that first through television. Actually, I'd never read a comic book. And so when my dad was returned stateside, I remember probably around first grade or so, my mom bought me a Batman comic, and I'm pretty sure it was the Neil Adams era. And I remember being completely excited but mystified because I'm like, why does Batman's cape look like it's 20 feet long? And, where's Robin at? And the Batmobile doesn't look. But I mean, right away, that was also another milestone being hooked into the comic book medium. And so that continued on for a number of years. And then, as I continued to doodle and I started drawing Spider-Man swinging from a building or the Enterprise blasting a planet with its phasers, I started doodling my own drawings, just kind of having that like what if. And I think because of those two influences, meaning superheroes and sci-fi, I was immediately inspired to create a superhero-esque type story, but also have it set in space with a spaceship. And so, I mean, other things came down the pike, like The Man Called Nova. I was a huge fan of that book. That to me was kind of like seeing Spider-Man, like being around for Spider-Man's first appearance. And then Star-Lord, and then Space Ghost being on Saturday mornings. And so I think all those continue to sort of push the direction of the story that I wanted to tell. And it's whether it's foolish or not, I tell people like I've been creating characters since around that 11-year-old age, and every one of those characters has never left me. They're still with me, to this day. But Black Alpha being the first is the first one I've spent a lot of time developing to get out in the public eye over the last several years.
Now you describe it as Batman with Iron Man's tech dropped into Star Wars.
Yes.
That is a great elevator pitch. Jay says he's super excited for the book, though. The premise is so cool. So I don't know if he means you. Yeah. Well, yeah. What's a little more in depth on what the story is about? Who is Black Alpha? I know I saw a post from you today that you're going to deal with some of his childhood, things that happened in his childhood, stuff like that. But who is Black Alpha?
He's a young man named Trandon Antares, and in the universe that it's set in, it's a different set of star systems. There's a group of space cops or Galactic Patrol, like the Green Lanterns, the Nova Corps, the Jedi Knights, called the Guardsmen. And since he was probably about kind of like when I was first inspired, about 5 years old, he's wanted to be these characters. And between being 5 up until his mid-teens, there's a mysterious threat that's wiping out all these Guardsmen faction. There's like 12 different star systems. Each one has its own faction protecting and representing them. And so he kind of goes through a character arc early on where he feels let down by these characters because a number of things have happened in his life. Like his mother passed away from illness when he was a young boy. He has a younger brother. And when his younger brother was born, the mother passed away. And then later on, because of some events that'll unfold in the subplot, his colony was wiped out, which his father and brother were also casualties. So I'm very much playing upon the mythology of the superhero where they become orphaned, usually through some kind of tragedy. And so I want to tell a story of like, what if any of us could be in a position where a superhero-esque type position or job or whatever was in our reach. But then, you go from this innocent child to having these tragedies. And then when you end up having circumstances, kind of, there's a bit of Peter Parker and Bruce Wayne in there, I would say, the Batman tragedy, but also the fact that obviously Peter's relatability, I think, is why the character has been such a pop culture icon. And I wanted to combine those elements of like the superhero myth with tragedy, but also Peter Parker's relatability. And so he ends up finding what is called a cell suit, like that's the talisman of the guardsmen. Like the Jedi Knights have the Force and the lightsabers, the Green Lanterns have their rings. Well, the guardsmen have their cell suits. It's an augmenting suit. And he ends up finding one from a fallen guardsman and the ship. And it's almost like the kid in him sort of forgot what the guardsmen represented. So he initially uses these things as a way to gain vengeance on he thinks who is responsible for his family being lost. And so there'll be a bit of this, like, he's probably around 18 or 20. He's unseasoned. He'll make some mistakes, and he's got a bit of a, sort of a chip on his shoulder now. And part of that is because of his life's experiences. But, through the course of his story, and I want it to unfold naturally, he will end up becoming the hero he always wanted to be as a young child, just not in the way that he imagined. So.
Okay. JD just dropped the Kickstarter link into the chat for anybody who wants to check it out. There's a great video on there with Tom explaining some of the stuff and some of the art. So now this is you're kickstarting for issue 2?
Correct.
Okay. Now what about issue 1? Is that still available? Will that be part of the Kickstarter?
Yeah, that's one of the perks, I guess, of the backers. Issue 1 has actually been done for quite some time. And then, of course, like a lot of us can relate to, real life got in the way. And I'm a new father now. So time management is a new skill. And so in order to continue moving the series along, and it's done in a 4-issue miniseries format, I basically need help, resources. And so that's what the Kickstarter is about, is to kind of gain some traction. And also, and we had an announcement a couple of days ago. We brought an artist, John Rossetti, who's worked on the Venture Brothers for Cartoon Network, and him and I are going to be collaborating on the art in the book. And that's really what it's about, is to get the resources in place so we can continue to move the book forward. And, some people have asked me, would it ever be an ongoing series? I'm not opposed to that thought, but I've always kind of structured it as miniseries, almost like a miniseries is its own book or movie. Mm-hmm. And that way there'll be a kind of a self-contained ending, but there'll be enough like loose threads in the plot to kind of pick up if it's successful enough. But getting the 4 issues for me will be a very big personal milestone. And I will say this, through the years, Black Alpha has been optioned a few times by Hollywood studios. And I probably got a little distracted by that too, about, being developed as a cartoon or animated film. And anyone who's ever dealt with Hollywood knows it doesn't go quite as cut and dried simple as what you see in media announcements. And so that's 3 different times it's happened by 3 different studios. And those situations they never gained traction. So I decided to return to my, one of my earlier passions, comics, and also sort of in a way reward, like I've had a pretty loyal fan base following the development of Black Alpha and selling it as a concept. And I feel like it's definitely time for them, but also for myself to really get people involved in the narrative, you know what I mean? And actually give them something to chew on rather than kind of always being intrigued by a concept.
All right. Now, this character might be familiar to people, not because they've seen the comic, but because it's shown up on TV a few times on The Big Bang Theory. How did that come about? How did Black Alpha show up in, was it Raj's apartment and in the comic shop?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of social media. Definitely has its problems, but I have always kind of tried to cheerlead the positive, effects of social media. And so any situation that I've had where it's Black Alpha being in The Big Bang Theory, even like some of the movie stuff, the options have all been basically Facebook. I'll connect with somebody and then I ended up signing a deal with The Big Bang Theory. It was kind of like a back and forth because I didn't have to pay them to have the stuff on the show and they didn't have to pay me. It was just an agreement that they could utilize some of my merchandise prototypes as kind of prop dressing, but it was still fun and to see it. And then of course I was so busy all the time. I didn't really get a chance to watch the show that much. I love it, but usually people will see it when it was on currently before it, it ended here in the last year or so. And they would say, "Oh, we saw your maquette, your little statue," or, we saw especially the posters in the comic shop. So that was just really fun, and once again, that came about because of social media. there was some stuff going on with USA Today at one time too with it. Same thing. Everyone that I've met in the internet age has created these wonderful opportunities, and even like I've had like toy prototypes made. All that's based around people that I see things on Facebook. So I love the collective community, especially in nerd culture, where you can collaborate with people. Interesting. You and I have this kind of different connection because I knew when I started seeing you online, I knew your name sounded very familiar, and it took a little while. And I was going through some of my artwork, and I think I reached out to you going, "Oh, I totally forgot about this. You wrote a book, and I did the cover for it." So we sort of have this interesting connection, like we were sort of collaborated in an odd sense that way, but didn't really get to know each other a little more until like our Facebook connection. So,
oh yeah. The book he's talking about was a children's chapter book called the Royal Crown Mystery Detective League that we worked on for Actionopolis, which is Shannon Eric Denton's side company he does. Mm-hmm. Shannon, of course, is part of Monster Forge now. He's been around the industry forever, but this was a series of chapter books that he was doing for kids. There was 2 waves. The first wave came out in print. The second one got held up, and I think they eventually put them out on digital on Amazon. So the book is available on Amazon. I've talked to him once or twice about making it print on demand option.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and the cover you did was absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you posted it again today, and that reminded me of it because we had talked about that so long ago. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Because you get so many people on social media and Facebook and stuff, and you're talking to all these people, and you start forgetting some of the connections, or it gets to a point where you're like, okay, I know that name, I see them all the time, but why do I know them?
Yeah, exactly.
And that was So I'd even kind of let it fall out of my mind. I forget that book sometimes because it was so long ago.
Yeah, it's hard to believe how long it's been.
Yeah. So, but if you guys want to check that out, like I said, it's on Amazon. How did you get into the industry? Where did you begin as in comics?
Well, I think the choice was made to get involved in comics, actually in films, probably roughly around 11-ish when Star Wars came out. Like a lot of people, that was a life impacting change. But I was a very shy meek kid back then. And so I kind of even knew reading, I was just consuming articles and magazines and behind the scenes books. And I knew that there was a bit of like swimming with the sharks thing going on with Hollywood. So I'm like, well, because I thought about enrolling in film school. So I'm like, but I'm a passionate storyteller. And and of course I love comics. John Byrne, I tell people, was my first rock star idol comic book artist influence. And him and Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men was the first thing that really kind of sucked me into the medium even more. And so I think right around that time, I was like, I would love to draw comic books. And so by the time I got in my mid-teens, I started reading Comic Scene, which was one of my favorite, along with Starlog, favorite magazines. And they would run articles in there like about the industry and obviously kind of how to break in. And obviously there was a different way to do that many years ago. And so one of the things I had heard was to either track down mailing information or start going to Comic Cons. And I'd probably even heard around San Diego, very first time around that time. And so it took me a number of years to get up the courage. And then I went to, I can tell you how long ago this was. It was the 89 Comic Con. And for me, that was like Shangri-La because, I got to see these artists. And to this day, I still kind of fanboy out around comic artists more than I would any movie star or TV actor. I sort of get like the shakes and I get that fun nervousness. And so getting to watch a lot of people I idolized. In fact, I have a funny story with that real quick. The convention center that they had it at, I was actually bringing my portfolio and I was crossing the street and Jack Kirby was there. Mm-hmm. And I was shaking and I knew it was him, and I wanted to say something and I froze up, so I remember going, wow, I got to see Jack Kirby. He stood about 3 feet away from me. That was another example of like, it just felt like a dream, being there. But I brought a portfolio with me, which is what I read. And of course I made some foolish mistakes and I brought a lot of pinup stuff. Didn't bring hardly any sequential, and all that was done with magic marker also. And the funny thing is that the person I remember, because I got in line and I did DC and Marvel first, and they both shot me down immediately. I remember exactly who it was. Mark Grunwald, the editor at Marvel, bless his soul.
Yeah.
Since he's passed on, he was the first one. He was actually after Elliot S. Magan or whatever, the writer. He was my first one. And I actually got to message him about a year or so ago saying, I remember you now. I know why you look familiar, because him and I shared table space as neighbors at Denver Comic Con. And I kept looking at him going, why does he look familiar? And I knew his name. But anyway, he did my first very brutal critique. And I remember that, you know, kind of like tucking my tail. And I needed to hear that, obviously. And then I remember actually going back to my room and being afraid, because I saw people ahead of me in line. And that's the other thing that I think everyone, especially in the modern age, is sort of, it's lost, that in order to view your work honestly and to listen to critique and learn from it, you need to hear some honest truths. You know, there's some people that come across very much like a Simon Cowell, and that's what their job is, to let you know you're not quite ready. In fact, that's exactly what Mark Grunewald told me. You're not quite ready for a Marvel assignment. So, you know, and I was very despondent, and I started working my way down to the smaller indie companies. And he was even told by the art director over at First Comics at the time that maybe I needed to be a truck driver instead, that this wasn't for everybody. But what ended up happening was, you know, by the time the con was almost done with, I ended up looking up artists. And so Carl, you know, Kessel, who was inking John Byrne on his run on Superman, I loved his work. And I walked up and asked him if he could look at my work. And he was very, very supportive. He said, you've got some great line work. You know, there's some, you know, so he said, have you ever thought about being an inker? And so I went ahead and he gave me some information to send for samples. And I did one over Norm Brayfogle on some Batman stuff, and then also some Avengers stuff. And it was fun, but then I kind of circled back around to everything that Carl actually told me about, you know, storytelling 101. And I'm like, I really want to be a penciler. And so I went ahead and studied those for a few more years, went back to San Diego Comic-Con again. And so it was a complete polar opposite of the first response. First thing I heard, I went to DC, I decided to repeat my pattern. And it was Casey Carlson, you know, he was an editor on Legion of Superheroes. And him and his partner said, oh, who are you working for, Tom? And that was the response that I got from almost everybody there. And then Cully Hamner, who was doing some work for Malibu, introduced me to his editor, and he gave me his card and information. So I waited for a few months, and the editor never got back to me. But I had a random call from Marvel probably about 3 months after that Comic-Con. And I thought my roommate at the time actually was playing a prank. I thought it was a practical joke, and it was Matt Mora working with Joey Cavalieri at Punisher 2099. And so he calls me back, and he's like, yeah, love to talk to you about working with me. So, and of course, what I equated to most people is, like, if you're an actor with a dream and you want to be in a TV show or movie, getting a call, especially from a big company like Marvel, it feels that way emotionally. Like, you know, you feel like you're walking on cloud nine. And then, unfortunately, you know, when I got in the industry, I was the last artist on the book. That's kind of when the market imploded. So that taught me a lesson. Like, just because you get your foot in the door doesn't mean that it stays there. And you have to keep hustling. I think a lot of people assume, you know, once you get your foot in any industry, honestly, that it's just going to be coasting, you know, and I learned that the hard way. And so I did try and get some more gigs, but the more the time had gone on, I had a couple of friends who ended up migrating over to video games, and video games are really taking off. And so they said, you should come over and do concept art for video games. The money's better. It's salary, there's benefits. And so I eventually made my way doing a number of titles, like for the PlayStation Network and stuff. But, you know, and at the end of the day, it's all the same, right? Like, the 5-year-old in me gets excited doing art for video games, for comics. And I remember when Facebook really took off, some people asked me if I ever thought about trying to maybe approach Marvel or somebody to do comic work. And I started thinking, I'm like, because it is such a labor intensive process that people don't realize, if I'm going to try and spend that time, I guess, getting comic book sequential content off the ground, why not do my own stuff? And so about a decade ago, I decided to dust off Black Alpha a little bit. And, you know, and the story has changed since I was 11, but I decided to kind of finally lock in a direction. And then I decided to utilize something like Facebook to say, well, you know, I'm going to get the word out there. And I can say firsthand, anyone who's ever done this, like, getting your own material out there can be very terrifying, because you feel so vulnerable. Like, you know, people, if they like Spider-Man and you're known for that, they're going to come and gravitate. But if they're like something they've never heard of, you know, there's a little bit of that threat that it may land on its head, or it's going to land with a thud. And so I decided to make the choice from that point on that I was going to really devote my time to getting my own library of properties off the ground that I've been creating since 11, a couple more, you know, when I was 16 and onward. And the interesting thing is, there's about 7 characters I have in the public eye, and all 7 of those have had interest from Hollywood over the last several years. Just nothing, there's been no traction yet. So with all that being said, you know, I partnered up with these guys, WTF Comics, that built the Kickstarter campaign. And they, you know, their basically motto is, let's focus on comic book storytelling. And so that's really what my mantra is, you know, I'll always be open to discussions about cartoon or movie stuff, but it feels good to have more of a focus on comics where you're still getting a story out to an audience and they can jump on board. And then, that way I'm not as distracted by kind of the Hollywood scene too. And so that's been a real lifesaver for me creatively to sort of want to do. Here's my daughter, by the way. Hi, sweetheart. Basically, it's big, like I said, it's almost given me sort of my act 2 or a new lease on life to keep with it, because, I'm sure this, Dan, that, creative endeavors are roller coaster constantly. We always see the triumphs in the public eye. So it takes a lot to kind of really keep the morale going to always pursue stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm curious why Kickstarter over, say, taking your book over to Image or something like that. Because, what you're describing sounds similar to like Eric Larson, who Savage Dragon was something he came up as a kid. And he worked, when he had a chance, he brought that character back. And these are all characters he grew up creating and stuff. Why go the crowdsource way instead of doing something like taking it to a comic publisher? What's the advantage of Kickstarter?
Well, I actually did approach Image at one time, and I was chatting with one of the guys that worked with Todd McFarlane on Spawn, and he was only had so much influence, and there's a lot of politics, obviously, and the networking, but a lot of independent publishers for years have this, they have this philosophy that they're not interested in taking a look at your work unless, like, if it's a one shot or a mini series like what I'm doing, they want the completed content first. And so, and a lot of people don't know that. I unless I'm wrong, I personally don't know of a lot of publishers nowadays, like a book publisher, that would offer you an advance or whatever so that you can go off in the woods for, a few months to write your book. Yeah. There's really not the comic book equivalent of that, as far as I know, that the publisher will offer you money to create. So basically I had to figure out, and I've been kind of I like to sort of study everything around me. And I've been watching the Kickstarter model become viable, even for a number of well-known comic creators. Carl Kessel, I just mentioned, they've been doing some books, and Ron Randall with his Trekker series, he did work for DC for years. I've been seeing a lot of these creators use Kickstarter to be sort of a direct pipeline to their audience to basically, everyone sort of becomes invested in all these levels to create the resources to get the book completed. We are currently talking to publishers about Black Alpha. There's a couple of big indie ones that are very interested, but it still is kind of like pretty much, I would imagine that they would like to see completed content before they even consider, I guess, finally signing on the dotted line, to publish it. So.
Okay. Yeah, we are at the halfway point in the show, so let's take a quick commercial break, and then we will come back with Tom Raish. Be right back.
Watching Minute to Skim It on the Experience. So, hello. All right, I've got lots of books to review for you guys today. And Hannah just basically showed up just the number ones and showed them to me, and I was like, "Oh, we have
just for the indies,
just for the indies." Yeah, I was like, "We have got a lot to do."
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise of adventure, a promise of excitement, a promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page, there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We are talking with artist Tom Raish. Well, I guess artist, writer, because you're doing everything on this book, right? I mean, you're bringing in another artist to help with it, but you're writing it, you're drawing it.
No, actually, I know where my talents lie and where they don't, and I'm more of kind of the world builder, and so I come up, I sort of guide the plot. I'm working with a writer currently, Adam Bulk, who's a screenwriter. He's writing the comic. That's kind of how I roll, because I've tried writing. My stuff is just ripe with cliche. And then also Christian Colbert was the first artist that helped me complete, the first issue of Black Alpha. So, and at the time too, like, where I was at when we worked on the first book, I was, working in the video game industry full time, and I could afford to pay someone to help me, but that's kind of changed since then. So another reason why we're utilizing Kickstarter. But Adam actually approached me, found me on Facebook, and said whatever he saw, what I was promoting, sounded very intriguing to him. And he kind of asked permission, like, I'm a screenwriter. I would love to take a crack at, doing your world. And so it's interesting because I've had that happen a few times. I've had a couple of different screenwriters. There's a couple, Mark and Anna Cassidy, who their career is kind of taking off in Hollywood. And they wrote a 1-hour pilot for If There Was a Cartoon. And then another friend of mine, Richard, who did a 90-minute feature film script. So I work with 3 different writers that have done kind of their own 3 different subtle takes on the universe. And I keep saying that what's fun for me as a more of a world builder, content creator, is, the writers give my characters some voices and some nuances and, a number of elements, kind of deeper layers that I sort of get to view like an audience member, which is very fun for me, because they'll come up things in dialogue or even flesh out the scenes a little bit more, where I'm going, that's great. I probably never would have thought of that. So I'm very, very grateful for my collaborators on this whole endeavor.
All right, very cool. And you're bringing in colorists and letterers and whatnot as you're doing this, or are you taking on any of those roles as well?
I was the primary colorist. I did a few pages in issue 1 that was all completely me, like, the line work and the colors. Christian did a few that way, and then we kind of met in the middle through the majority of the book, where he did the line work and I was doing the coloring on it. So, and I don't want to let anybody down or burst a bubble when it comes to creating the sequential art. Probably doing layouts is the least fun aspect for me, and so that's why, like the artist I mentioned, John Rossetti from the Cartoon Network's Venture Brothers, we're going to take the same approach, the same pipeline. He's going to actually do the layouts and the breakdowns and do the line work, and then I will come in and do the colors. So the same kind of, like I said, production process.
Very cool. So the Kickstarter, I had a chance to look it over pretty quick. I watched the video. Excuse me. And I got to look at the first couple tiers of being able to support. And there's some nice affordable tiers. You can do a digital tier. You can do, where you get a book. But what are some of the bigger the perks as it gets farther along? What are the goals that you're shooting for?
Well, the Kickstarter is about 178% funded as of today. We reached our goal in I put 48 hours, and we're hoping to reach a new milestone. Obviously, if we reach a higher goal than what we passed, the goal is to sort of lock someone like John Rossetti and more to continue, possibly start working on issue 3 and 4. I mean, if we get to that higher level. And so like one of the higher tiers is you can actually get, besides autograph materials, and there's me signing like some $29.99 Funko Pops. We have a Funko Pop for Black Alpha, fun stuff like, stickers and buttons and, all the different materials, prints. That one of the higher tiers is you actually get a custom drawing for me, black and white or in color, any character of your choice. So I say, like, if you love The Walking Dead, you love Game of Thrones, you love Stranger Things, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, doesn't matter, Marvel or DC, I will do a custom drawing, for you. And that's like one of the higher tiers. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I know somebody asked this today, because Jack Egan from WTF Comics actually built the Kickstarter. I will have to double check this, but unless that's been added, or I might have missed it, we're kind of discussing possibly releasing a print that was, a copy of the poster that's on the Big Bang Theory, and also having your likeness in the book somewhere, one of those higher tiers too. So,
okay. Now, are you a little worried that if you're drawing images for people with their favorite characters, that it's going to spoil something for you? Like somebody says, hey, I want this variant of Loki that we got to see in the Loki series, and you haven't seen Loki yet. So, any chance, aren't you a little worried that might ruin something for you?
No, actually, believe it or not, I'm one of those very rare breed that I don't mind spoilers. I checked out the Marvel Comics adaptation of Star Wars before I saw it in the theaters. I did that with the Empire Strikes Back adaptation too. So I'm one of those people that, for whatever reason, it's never bothered me. I think that I enjoy like the twists that come. I mean, there's been a few things, going to see The Sixth Sense. I didn't know the twist of that one, and I enjoyed it. But by the way, spoilers, people who haven't seen The Sixth Sense, it never bothered me. I think I'm always more intrigued in the execution. You know what I mean? And there's an old saying, I could be wrong, but they say there's like seven original stories, and it's really a matter of how people sort of do their take on those 7 archetypes. So anyway, with all that being said, I mean, I do a lot of reading. I'm always reading periodicals and the trades, and I've seen a few things about Loki, even though I haven't finished binge watching it, that it won't diminish my enjoyment. So, and I will say this, one of the fun things for me, and I did this with, any character that I've been asked to draw, or even stuff with Punisher 29.99, I love kind of the challenge of doing my stylistic take. So anybody can just bring me just about anything. And I love sort of giving it my imprint. So that's part of the fun and the thrill. I mean, there might be some strange requests, and I will try and honor those. But I mean, any character that somebody comes to me, I will always do my best version of that. And that sort of kind of, like I said, really creates kind of a fun aspect for me as the artist.
Yeah. Did you say there was a Funko Pop of Punisher 2099?
Yeah, that's one of in the tier rewards.
I didn't realize they had done one. Is that a custom, or is that one that they put out to general populace?
I don't believe it's a custom, as far as I know. I mean, I know that something like that doesn't get as much, probably trying to think of the term, relevance or importance, I suppose, in the scheme of the Funko Pop world, but apparently they made a few. So,
well, they might start getting a little more exposure with the upcoming second Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, because they introduced Spider-Man 2099 at the end of that. So that character will be thrust in the spotlight. So you might get a nice resurgence on Punisher 29 popularity and get people asking you for drawings of him again.
Yeah, and in fact, I've kind of thought about doing that on my own recently, because I mean, my style has changed a little bit through the years. I mean, I got into the industry when the image style was very popular, which I love the image style still to this day. And so my work reflects a lot of that, kind of the gradients and metallic and kind of a sort of a bombastic quality. And because of my experiences working in a couple of film projects and in the video game industry, my style has changed somewhat. So it'd be interesting to sort of do what I draw like now, that version of the character compared to like, the comic time and stuff. So I thought that would just be fun to do that anyway.
Now, you said that you did some work in the film and the video game industry. Any titles that people would, by any real popular titles or anything big?
Well, the first claim to fame would be because the characters are familiar to most people in a couple of generations. redesigned the Hardy Boys for the Nancy Drew games that you could actually buy at Walmart. And so I put that on my resume just because that's still kind of cool. Now I know maybe some younger people may or may not know who those characters are, but that's a call out to me. And then the title that I worked on for the PlayStation Network was, and I don't know how like popular that was. I kind of equated to like early Angry Birds. Instead, you tossed celebrities around. We had to get celebrities' likenesses and endorsements and contracts. David Hasselhoff, Andy Dick, George Takei were being tossed around like a rag doll in this particular game engine. And, so I worked on a couple of things like that. And then the other games that I did, I would equate to stuff that people have heard of. Like I worked on a game called Fortune Online, which is like kind of Torchlight, sort of World of Warcraft-esque. The interesting thing was Gazillion Entertainment was a company that I worked for. They also did a Marvel Heroes MMO. So here I was, the Marvel artist, not working on the Marvel game and working on their fantasy game. So I thought that was kind of interestingly ironic. And but I will say this, that the number of titles that I've done have generally been more fantasy based, like the World of Warcraft. And what I really appreciate about that is it sort of expanded my skill set and repertoire for tackling fantasy characters instead of everything being more superhero related. So I appreciate that fun experience and education.
Cool. Now we talked earlier before the show started that you're kind of up on the pop culture and you like to talk about those things. What are some of the newer shows and newer things out there that get your attention? What are the ones that you love to binge, like Witcher and Altered Carbon? What are the things that got your attention?
Well, here's another surprising thing. Some people are surprised to find out because of my role as a new father, among other things, and very busy. I don't always get to binge stuff when I hear people talking about them. So I have to like almost schedule it down the road for me. Like I ended up, like when Firefly was on years ago, I ended up actually scheduling that while I worked. I do artwork on my Cintiq, and I got to sort of listen to Firefly. Sometimes I have to do that. And so I know one of the newer shows that most people in my life are shocked to not see is Cobra Kai, because I'm a huge Karate Kid fan. Mm-hmm. And that one too, like I'll end up doing a little bit of reading about it to prep me. And I did start watching Jupiter's Legacy recently. But yeah, I sort of stay abreast of all the shows, and I think it just sort of depends on the mood. Now, when Dexter was first streaming years ago, that one I got sucked into immediately. And, that was one of those, like I watched episode after episode because I found the concept so intriguing, and I'm a huge Dexter fan. So there's a few like, really rare instances where I'll find something and then I'm watching them within a day or so. But the Marvel shows, I started watching WandaVision. I still have to finish that. I still haven't seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We did start watching Loki when it started. So I'm hoping to at least get caught up on those fairly new. And right now, The Mandalorian was the one that we made sort of Sunday viewing once a week. Trish and I did. So I got through both seasons of that. I'm excited for the new Boba. Anything that probably that I grew up with, either Star Wars or Marvel. That's what I tend to kind of binge watch. Is still the things I've loved since I was a kid. And I will say this, that shout out to The Mandalorian. I think they've done a great job of really keeping that feel of the original trilogy in place, but introducing new characters we've cared about. And same thing with the Marvel shows. It's been really, really interesting to watch them taking what would be a second-tier character like Loki and making him an A-list character through the films, and with Tom Hiddleston's performance, he's become iconic in his own right, as that character. So,
I agree with you on The Mandalorian. I think where they succeeded that maybe the more recent films haven't is that the more recent films were trying to make Star Wars movies, and I think Filoni and Favreau were trying to make from the same inspiration that Lucas did, the Akira Kurosawa films and the old spaghetti westerns. And they kind of went back to what inspired Lucas and kept that feel, where, J.J. Abrams and stuff were just trying to make more Star Wars movies, Yeah,
I feel like there was some fan service going on there. You have to be careful of that because inspiration is always an interesting thing, because I know that like anyone who's, has any interest, I've done just about any documentary you can think of about Gene Roddenberry creating Star Trek, George Lucas doing Star Wars. And I know that the pitch with a lot of these, and I actually include it in Black Alpha in a way, the space Western, and I always say, Star Wars is a space Western with a samurai feel. Star Trek is a space western with like naval adventures of the old Imperial, the Navy for the British Empire, with like Captain Horatio Hornblower. Black Alpha is a space western with basically a superhero vibe, pretty much. So yeah, I think that sort of getting in touch with going back to your roots of like what inspires your work. I always say the creative stew, or as I put it, my fresh coat of paint. That's one thing I will say about Black Alpha that has been fun for me when people see it is and this is what I kind of designed it to be, something that's familiar but new, so it's fun, but it's sort of, you can wrap its familiarity around yourself like a nice cozy blanket. And I don't hide my influences at all. Even I done a lot of spaceship design. I think Jay asked about that, like, spaceship designs in Black Alpha. And real quick, I've spent years developing the concept, no different than you would a movie or TV project, like doing tons of character designs, model sheets, spaceship concepts, because I want the universe and the world to feel very tangible to the audience. And so I've said it before, like a lot of things out there, it's hard to come up with something completely original. So even my spaceship designs have a very Star Warsian and Trek feel, although I've also heard that Black Alpha ship, the Aramis 7, also resembles a lot of the Kevin Sorbo Andromeda TV show. But that's kind of how I approach everything. In fact, another one of my projects real quick I'll mention is the Steampunk Adventures of Salem Tusk, which I've always pitched as my kind of African-American Indiana Jones meets the Wild Wild West series or concept. And I have a Hollywood actor, Bishop Stevens, who's been on The Walking Dead, Chicago PD. He's been in a number of films, and he's a former WCW, WWE wrestler. And we met on Facebook. And so we've been developing that project now for the last 3 years. And, we kind of took a break, put it on the shelf, and maybe trying to retool the concept so it's a little more appealing to risk-adverse investors, But, in everything that I do, there's all, like, I have another character, Damian Moon. I pitch him as James Bond meets Doctor Strange. There's always that elevator pitch, because that's my influences are right there. I know where they come from.
Yeah. Interesting. I think those are some really good ideas. And I got to see some of the steampunk one on your Facebook page. And I was kind of curious where that was going. And, what is your long-term goal? I mean, right now you're focused on Black Alpha and the Kickstarter. You've already funded. Now you're, adding to it and hitting the stretch goals. Working on that. What's down the line? Will you bring either of those projects, the Damian Moon, the Steampunk, to Kickstarter? Where do you see, your next couple of years going?
Well, I think we're definitely going to focus on Kickstarter projects. I mean, I've already have an agreement with WTF Comics, to do another one of my characters as a one-shot in the 90s, and it's my love letter to Image. It's the character kind of has like a grifter from Wildcats meets Spawn, Terminator 2, The Crow, all those 90s things in there. And that's our next one down the road, is to do, and very much a 90s style. Mm-hmm. But I do know that, between that and I know there's been discussions about doing motion comics with the guys at WTF. And then one of the investors in the company, we are looking at possibly doing animation down the road. So that's probably my sort of like near-term, long-term plan. I mean, the goal that I had years ago, and I've had to sort of, I guess, kind of alter that a little bit, is I wanted to create talented colleagues. And of course, it all boils down to funding, but I wanted to create a content studio no different than like a Pixar, you know what I mean? Where you're kind of have a brand and you're known for creating a young adult kids books, young adult novel series, kids books, comics, video games, toys, RPGs, films, TV. That's what my goal has been for years. And because of my experiences, I've had to learn to go, well, honestly, it's a little more one step at a time, because those can be a little lofty and you sort of lose yourself in the details, instead of like, well, in order to get to that point, we need to have a few of these things fall into place first. So I call, for lack of a better term, my library of intellectual properties as the Trashverse. It's not a great name, but that's what I have at the moment as a working title. And so the Black Alpha Kickstarter is sort of the official launch of the Trashverse within the comic book space, And so I'm going to still continue to look at doing Kickstarters down the road of some of my IPs. I mean, I have a pretty wide variety of characters. I mean, for the most part, the interesting thing is too, even with Black Alpha with its superhero elements, I tend to not really do straight hero superhero stuff. It's usually maybe a slight twist on it. A few of these other ones are more like adventure fantasy. I have a female lead, Evelyn 11, that's a little more in the Mad Max world, and that's what I'm going to focus on, is getting these other characters out there. And I hope that that's what kind of creates a bit of a foothold in the market, is that, I'm not trying to mimic what Marvel and DC are doing. And, and nothing against people that want to do their own superheroes. That's not what I'm saying at all. But for me, I want to try and do something a little different and sort of put out in the market, and hopefully it'll kind of stand on its own.
Okay. I want to circle back around to Black Alpha, because I realize the one thing we haven't talked about, we got a little idea of who Black Alpha is. What's the threat? Who's he going up against? What's the bad guy in Black Alpha?
Well, we have 3 of them, and they're all, once again, they're based upon archetypes. I have Father Mordroth, which I would probably compare him to. He's a little bit of like a Palpatine figure, somebody behind the scenes. The character Argos, which would be kind of Boba Fett-esque, Darth Maul. And then Tolbrak, which with him, I equate him to kind of a cosmic version of like the Kingpin meets the Hulk. He's very frightening looking. He's massive. He's got these interesting facial tattoos. And I've said this too, like the one things that I personally feel when people are creating new science fiction IP, and whether it's in films or whatever, they sort of, I don't know, maybe that's not the kind of direction they want to go, but I feel like we've been missing our Boba Fett's and Darth Vader's in science fiction villainy. And so I've worked very hard to kind of create characters that have an instant visual imprint and iconography. And there's a little bit of aspect, like how do these translate to toys? But, the characters, the bad guys, there's going to be a sense of mystery, but, within the confines of the story we want to tell, and if we have enough space, I want to give everybody a bit of depth and layers. So I don't want anyone to be just completely evil, like a mustache twirling villain. I want them to have a little bit, like any great villain, there's a little bit of relatability. And sometimes as they say, they think they're the hero of their own story. But there's a few others down the road, in the universe. But those are the main 3, and it's been really fun to sort of like, take the idea in your head and then see them come to life visually and develop a personality. But yeah, I mean, that's, as the old saying goes, your hero is only as interesting as the villains. And at times they can even be a little more fun to create, honestly. I guess that's the challenge, is you don't want your character to be a little bit blah and milquetoast, and have the villains be more interesting. I know sometimes people claim that Marvel has had a problem with their villains not being interesting enough, kind of the reverse, but I don't want to be the opposite of that either, where people kind of lose interest in the hero,
Yeah. There's been an interesting thing online. I've seen people basically asking, why are all aliens humanoid? And you look at Star Wars and you look at Star Trek, and the majority of the aliens are humanoid, because it's easier when you're casting somebody, because all your actors have 2 arms, 2 legs. But when you're doing a comic, you have a lot more freedom in design. The aliens that come up in this series, are we looking at more variety in body type and stuff like that? Or is it a humanoid based setup? What type of designs are you doing for your aliens?
Well, I mean, at this point, it's an influence of Star Trek. I have a couple of theories about that, actually. I mean, down the road, I would like to do sort of something mixing up where you have, a person that's all head and little torso and maybe has 5 limbs, 6 limbs. I mean, I'm open to that kind of stuff. But I also feel like this is kind of my deep nerd theory about like how sci-fi pop culture will stick with an audience. I think that things need to be still relatable. You know what I mean? Like there needs to be terms that we can understand as a human audience, because I think when things are a little too alien and strange, we're a little bit repelled by it. And so that's why I think a lot of humanoids, and even the concepts in like Star Wars and Star Trek, have concepts that we here on Earth understand. And so I feel like besides budgetary reasons, I personally like, in the Green Lantern Corps, they have so many different kinds of alien types of people, which is interesting. But Kilowog is still slightly humanoid, and Sinestro is definitely a humanoid. So I sort of find that for the audience, I think that they'll still be able to kind of jump on board with the character of alien origin, if he still has something, relatable about them, like, his emotions come through. Now, I will say this, District 9, one of my favorite movies, the Prongs or the Prawns or whatever they're called. I love the fact that film created a very relatable character in the Christopher Johnson and what he was going through. And he looked very bug-like, obviously. So that to me is one of the rare exceptions that we were really were able to come invest in a story, relatability. But overall, that's probably the direction I will still tend to take with Black Alpha, is my my aliens will have, humanoid qualities. And I'm a sucker for the person dressed to head to toe in armor, like that Mystery of Boba Fett. So some of my characters have that going on. The one habit I'm trying to break, because tattoo culture has very much become prevalent in the current age, is I want to sort of step away from the visual cue that the bad guys have tattoos, facial tattoos or something. And so I'm trying to break that habit a little bit. But I think that was just kind of a subconscious, something that instantly the character has to be look threatening or whatever. And I do want to mix up that kind of design philosophy.
Yeah. All right. Well, so everybody out there, take a look at Tom's Kickstarter. We put the link a little higher up in the chat. It's already funded, but you can jump in now, get some of the great goal or the great rewards that he's offering, and jump in with issue 2. You can get issue 1 through the Kickstarter, help fund issues 3 and 4, and make this full series come to life. We are going to be wrapping up the show here. This is our sign off for the evening, so there's nobody following. This is the end of the night. But come back tomorrow. We got a full lineup of stuff here on The Experience. And I will be back next week with the Dan Wickline Show on Tuesday. So, Tom, thank you very much for joining us. It was a real pleasure getting a chance to talk with you. And I look forward to reading Black Alpha myself. So
awesome. Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for joining us. Jay, thanks for some great questions. Jay says he back at the first bay. This is going to be awesome. I can feel it. And he wishes us a good night. So good night to everybody.
Thank you, Jay, very much.
Good night. And JD, thanks for running the board. Good night, everybody.
Good night.